it's not just an act of charity that we have to think of the annihilation of caste. It is for everyone, for this society as a whole, because we can forget about being like China or being like America as long as we have this disease in our souls. While I'm talking about changing our heroes, I just wanted to read you something. In 1904, when here in Kerala there was a movement that was fighting for the rights of Dalits to be educated. The father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, was in South Africa. And what is the legend of Mahatma Gandhi? That he fought caste, that he fought race in South Africa. When he came back from South Africa in 1913, he was already being called a Mahatma. Let me tell you that the story of Mahatma Gandhi that we are taught in school and that we are made to believe is a lie. And it's time we faced up to it. It is time we unveiled some real truths here, because we cannot be basing our idea of ourselves on as a nation on a lie. So while Mahatma Ayyankali was fighting for education of Dalit children here, Gandhi was in South Africa, and I want to read to you what he said about Dalit peoples in South Africa. South Africa, there were two kinds of Indians. One were the passenger Indians who went there to do business, and the other was the indentured labor, who mostly came from subordinate classes and castes. And here is what Gandhi said about the bonded labor. Whether they are Hindus or Mohammedans, they are absolutely without any moral or religious instruction worthy of the name. They have not learned enough to educate themselves without any outside help. Placed thus, they are apt to yield to the slightest temptation to tell a lie. After some time, lying with them becomes a habit and a disease. They will lie without any reason, without any prospect of bettering themselves materially, indeed without knowing what they are doing. They reach a stage in life when their moral faculties have completely collapsed owing to neglect. Now, this goes on, the same tone is used about black African people. When he was in jail, he talks about Africans in the most horrible way. Here is a passage of Gandhi in jail with Kafirs, black people. We were all prepared for hardships, but not quite for this experience. We could understand not being classed with the whites, but to be placed on the same level with the natives seemed to be too much to put up with. And I felt that Indians had not launched our passive resistance too soon. Here was further proof that the obnoxious law was meant to emasculate Indians. Apart from whether or not this implies degradation, I must say it's rather dangerous. Kafirs as a rule are uncivilized, the convicts even more so. They are troublesome and dirty and live like animals. Then he goes on to call them savages, and I have resolved in my mind on an agitation to ensure that Indian prisoners are not lodged with Kafirs or others. We cannot ignore the fact that there's no common ground between them and us, and whoever wants to sleep in the same room as them has ulterior motives for doing so. See, I have actually followed Gandhi in South Africa, and it started out with my looking at the debates between Gandhi and Ambedkar, and then going back, looking at his attitudes on caste, and going back and looking at the attitude on race. And all his life, a person whose doctrine of nonviolence was based on an acceptance of the most brutal social hierarchy the world has ever known, the caste system. What does this mean? What does this say to us? a person who believed that always the hereditary occupation of people who belonged to whichever caste they belonged to should be maintained. So I ask you, a person who believed that a scavenger should remain a scavenger all their lives. I will read to you an essay Mahatma Gandhi wrote called My Ideal Bhangi, My Ideal Scavenger. So my question is, do we need to name our universities after a person like Gandhi, or do we need to name our universities after someone like Gandhi? You know, at some point, we have to stop being dishonest. At some point, we really have to face up to centuries of lies we have been told and lies we have told ourselves. There is nothing I'm saying here that is not straight from the horse's mouth. Everything I'm saying is quoted from the writings of Gandhi himself. I'm not making any judgments. In 1936, when perhaps one of the most famous revolutionary texts, The Annihilation of Caste, was written by Dr. Ambedkar, one of the most brilliant, intellectual, erudite texts full of rage against a system that still exists today. I'll come to that. In 1936, Gandhi wrote an essay called My Ideal Bhangi, no, The Ideal Bhangi. Bhangi, as you know, in the north is a scavenger. He should know how a right kind of latrine is constructed and the correct way of cleaning it. He should know how to overcome and destroy the odor of excreta and the various disinfectants to render them innocuous. He should likewise know the process of converting urine and night soil into manure. But that is not all. My ideal Bhangi would know the quality of night soil and urine. He would keep a close watch on these and give timely warning to the individual concerned. Now, many years later, today's Prime Minister, Modi, wrote a text too. It was called Karma Yogi. And here is what he says. He's also talking about Bhangis, the Balmiki community. I do not believe that they have been doing this job to sustain their livelihood. Had this been so, they would not have continued with this kind of job generation after generation. At some point of time, somebody must have got the enlightenment that it is their, the Balmikis, duty to work for the happiness of entire society and the gods, and that they have to do this job bestowed upon them by gods, and this job should continue as an internal spiritual activity for centuries. Right? So this is what the powerful people in this country believe. And the question we have to ask ourselves is it all right to go on naming roads and universities and bazaars and statues and programs after them? Or is it time for us to be a little more honest? Now, I just want to end with a small assessment of caste today. You know, how we today have a government that is proud to proclaim itself as a government of the Hindu Rashtra. It is proud to say that we are a Hindu nation. How did this idea of Hindutva first begin? You know, early on in the 17th century and earlier, the subordinate caste Dalits were converting to Christianity and to Islam in their millions, There was no problem, nobody minded that. But at the turn of the century, when the idea of an empire began to be replaced by the idea of a nation state, when it was not enough to ride a horse into Delhi and say, now I'm the Emperor of India, but the politics of representation began, there began a huge anxiety about numbers. You know, at that point, the upper castes, Hindus, decided, the privileged caste, let me say, they decided that it would be terrible if the 40 million Dalits now were going to continue to convert. And that's when the whole upper caste Hindu reformist movement started, of which Gandhi was a legatee. And that, you know, so if you read their texts, Hindus never referred to themselves as Hindu. Earlier, they used to only refer to themselves as their caste name. But then Hindu became not a religious but a political identity. They started to talk about the Hindu nation, the Hindu race, and that's how Hindutva started. Today, you have the secular liberals and the debate between them and the Hindutva brigade about how Islam came to India. And at that point, the seculars will say, oh, you're exaggerating the fact that, you know, there was so much vandalism and they broke temples. And the Hindutva would say, no, the Islamists came and they broke all our temples and they destroyed our culture. But you have someone like Jyotiba Phule, one of the earliest modern anti-caste intellectuals, who said, yes, they broke the temples, but thank God they broke the temples. They invited us into their dining rooms. There was that whole breaking of the caste system which people celebrated. So even our contemporary debates are so weak when you don't put justice at the core of things. Dr. Janeshwaran introduced me, when he introduced me, he said, you know, she has always stood with the marginalized. You know, I actually have a different view of myself, which is that I actually think it's an awful thing when I feel when people sometimes introduce me as a writer who is the voice of the voiceless. I don't believe there's anything like the voiceless. There is only the deliberately silenced. Nobody is voiceless, you know, and I don't have to represent anybody but myself. I think what we need to ask ourselves is, what kind of people are we? Are we a people who places justice at the center of our society? Or are we a people who enjoys the idea of institutionalizing injustice? Are we a people who are so sick that we actually believe that there are some people who deserve more entitlement than others? Because if we are that kind of people, we're a very, very sick people. And once you put justice at the core of how you think, then the stories that you tell are different. Today, people talk a lot about how, you know, this new economy has broken the caste system and there are new networks and so on. So I just want to end with a very brief description of how caste and this new corporate capitalism is playing out. As Dr. Kanshalaya will be talking to you about, you know, the fact is that at the turn of the century, the debate on caste was what created Hindutva, the idea of trying to bring the Dalits into the Hindu fold. Today, we have a Hindutva government that has come to power and proved it doesn't need the Muslim vote, it doesn't need the Dalit vote, because it has the whole section of what is known rather obscenely as OBC, other backward caste, which has swung towards Hindutva. So what does this mean to the marginalized? So we, as we know, in this nation of 1 billion people, 800 million or so live on less than 20 rupees a day. We celebrate the Dandi March, where Gandhi mobilized millions of people. You know, however much we criticize him, we cannot say he was not a great mobilizer. He mobilized millions of people against the salt tax. We do not remember the Mahad Satyagraha, where our own people prevented our own people from drinking water from a public tank. That is the real Satyagraha. But that was even referred to as a duragraha. But the Mahat Satyagraha fought for water, for the access to public water. And the Salt Satyagraha fought for salt tax. Today, we have a corporation, the Tatas, who controls the trade of salt. So what is going on here? We have the Gujarat model that has been put before us. In Gujarat, 98% of Gujarati villages practice caste in egregious ways. Dalits are not allowed near common water. They are given different glasses. They are murdered. Caste is practiced, and this our media is saying is the great model for development. If you look at the fact that 100 Indians own more wealth than 25% of the GDP. Now you look at these big corporations, Reliance, Adani, Mittal, all, I would read them out to you, or maybe I will, but you can see that the major corporations, all of them are owned and run by Banias. Ambani, Mittal, Shahvi, Birla, Jindal, Adani, Mittal again, all the top corporations, all the wealth on the top is controlled by Banias who own the corporations. At the bottom, whether it's the Maoists in the Dandakaranya forest who are surrounded, the Adivasis, surrounded by Bania traders, or in the northeast, 2.7% of the population controls the economy. Who owns the newspapers? Times of India, Indian Express, ZTV. Now Reliance owns 27 news channels. The media is controlled owned by Banias, controlled by Brahmins. The corporations are owned by Banias. So capitalism and caste have merged to become the mother of all capitalism. And in the meantime, according to the National Crimes Bureau, a crime is committed against a Dalit by a non-Dalit every 16 minutes. Every day, more than 4 Dalit women are raped by upper caste. Every week, 13 Dalits are murdered and 6 are kidnapped. In 2012 alone, the year of the Delhi gang rape, which was reported all over the world, 1,574 Dalit women were raped. And only 10% of rapes are reported. So you can look at the figures. In 1919, in what came to be known as the Red Summer in the US, 76 black American men and women were lynched. In India, in 2012, 651 Dalits were murdered. And that's just the rape and butchery, not the stripping and parading naked, the forced shit-eating, the seizing of land, and the social boycotts. As Ambedkar said, to the untouchables, Hinduism is a veritable chamber of horrors. And today, we live in a country where, since 1947, when we supposedly became independent, there has not been a single day when the Indian Army has not been deployed against, quote, unquote, our own people. So from 1947, whether it's Kashmir, Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, Telangana, Punjab, Goa, every day of the year, the Indian Army is fighting its own people. And who are those people? Think about it. Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Adivasis, Dalits. So it's an upper caste in its DNA, an upper caste Hindu state always at war with the subordinates, with the religious minorities. So how are we going to change this? It has to be done in 100 different ways, but it has to be done with a change of who we think our heroes are and our heroines are. Ayyankali, Surekha Bhotmange, Pandita Ramabai, Savitribai Phule, Jyotiba Phule, these are the people that our people need to hear about. Enough of these old, bigoted people who have been sold to us on a sea of lies. I think we need to change the name of our universities to begin with. Thank you.